In the shadowed lanes of wartime Lisbon, a city suspended between fear and opportunity, an unusual pattern began to draw the attention of British intelligence. Few in 1941 realized that Portugal's capital, neutral, unbombed, and brimming with diplomats, refugees, and spies, had become one of the most critical crossroads of World War II. Yet within this complex ecosystem of shifting loyalties, MI6 officers noticed a figure whose movements defied every rule of surveillance. He appeared in cafes where German WWII officers drank espresso under false names, then resurfaced days later on the fringes of the British Embassy's safehouse network. The man left no consistent trace, no files, no reliable account of his past. To some, he was merely another displaced European trying to survive. But to a handful of senior Allied analysts, he was something else. A courier who seemed to move as if guided by an invisible map of the city's deepest secrets. The difficulty for British intelligence was not merely tracking him, it was understanding the stakes. Lisbon in 1941 had become a pressure valve for continental Europe, where escaped POWs mingled with black market traders, and where Axis and Allied spies often sat at adjacent tables, pretending not to recognize one another. MI6's Section 5, responsible for counter-espionage, had been observing the city's diplomatic quarter for months. They knew the German WWII station chief, Kurt von Holstein, maintained a web of informants stretching from the city's port to the luxurious Estoril coast. They also knew the U.S. Navy's attaché office, though not yet part of the OSS, gathered maritime intelligence that often overlapped uncomfortably with British operations. In that crowded field, the appearance of a single courier quietly serving multiple sides risked turning delicate intelligence flows into unpredictable chaos. A British field report dated March 3, 1941, noted, "Subject approaches contacts with considerable caution. Demonstrates knowledge of evasion techniques typical of trained signals personnel. No verifiable residency. No discernible allegiance." The reference to signals training caught the attention of senior MI6 analyst Colonel Charles Lenton. Signals specialists were not common civilians. They were trained, often aggressively recruited, and deeply embedded in wartime infrastructure. A man with such training, now drifting between foreign agents in a neutral capital, raised troubling questions. Had he deserted? Was he coerced? Or had he chosen to operate independently? A dangerous prospect in a city where information could decide naval battles hundreds of miles away. To make matters more complicated, U.S. intelligence in Lisbon was also observing him. One American attaché, Lieutenant William Harding, recorded that the man occasionally delivered scraps of maritime intelligence to the small U.S. naval office near Rua da Alfandega. These scraps were low-level but accurate, convoy departure rumors, U-boat sighting chatter from dockside informants, and whispered updates on Spanish border crossings. Harding later wrote in his notes, "He sells it cheaply. Too cheaply. As if testing us." That detail unsettled both American and British officers when it surfaced in a shared report. Why offer real intel at low value unless he was probing, mapping reactions, or feeding competing agencies to disguise deeper loyalties? The Ghost, as some within MI6 began to call him, seemed to follow a rhythm unseen by others. He appeared at the Estoril train station just minutes after WWII officers held clandestine meetings nearby. He passed through the Rocio district's crowd-drenched avenues without any witness recalling his face. Even his clothing changed between sightings, sometimes dressed like a dockworker in coarse wool, other times blending among refugees wearing worn civilian coats and carrying forged travel papers. Lisbon's police archives later showed no legal identity under the name he used in cafes. To British analysts, that was a sign of professional-grade concealment. Meanwhile, intelligence tensions were escalating across Europe. The RAF was preparing for intensified operations in the Mediterranean. German U-boats threatened Atlantic lifelines, and Allied codebreakers were beginning to detect subtle shifts in Axis communication patterns. Every scrap of information moved through Lisbon's spy networks mattered. A courier passing intel between enemies was more than a curiosity. He was a potential fracture point in an already fragile intelligence balance. As MI6 increased its focus, one strange detail emerged. A station file noted the man had been present in Lisbon months before many believed he arrived, confirmed by a Portuguese customs log that listed an alias strongly resembling his known false identity. That placed him in the city shortly after the fall of France, a period when thousands fled south through Spanish mountain passes. If he had traveled that route, he might have carried intelligence capable of influencing early Allied decisions in the Mediterranean. Or he might have arrived with nothing but desperation and luck. No one could tell. By late 1941, the man's reputation as the Ghost had solidified among both British and American observers. They agreed on only one fact: his operational discipline exceeded that of a casual informant. He knew how to move without being followed. He knew how to speak without revealing. And he knew how to disappear just long enough to reappear at the heart of another agency's surveillance zone. As the year closed and the global war expanded, MI6 officers prepared to intensify their investigation. But one question began to press harder than any other. If the Ghost served multiple masters, who, if anyone, did he truly serve? By the beginning of 1942, British intelligence had uncovered a fragment of the Ghost's past, enough to raise alarms, but not enough to solve his identity. The discovery came from an MI6 liaison officer stationed in Cairo, who recognized elements of the courier's tradecraft from training exercises conducted in North Africa. That region, scarred by shifting fronts between the Afrika Korps and British 8th Army, had been a proving ground for signals personnel. And according to an internal Allied file labeled Recovered Partial, the Ghost had once served as a low-ranking signals specialist attached to a support unit operating near Mersa Matruh in June 1940. His record ended abruptly just after the rapid German advance that summer. No death report. No capture report. No repatriation. Officially, he had disappeared into the desert. The implications of this were unsettling. Men who vanished from desert warfare rarely returned, unless they resurfaced in intelligence circles, often shaped by trauma, opportunity, or coercion. British analysts began to suspect that the Ghost's silence in Lisbon was not accidental. The question became, had he been recruited by someone before he fled North Africa? Or had he sold fragments of information merely to survive the long chain of refugee routes stretching from Egypt to Spain? In mid-January 1942, as intelligence traffic increased, MI6 intercept units working with the WWII service made an unexpected discovery. German radio cables exchanged between Berlin and the WWII station in Lisbon contained references to an informant whose pattern of deliveries matched the Ghost's timeline. He was referred to only by a code designator, K-12. The data he offered the Germans appeared minor on the surface. Allied convoy schedules, rumors of RAF reconnaissance flights, and speculation about British supply shortages. But analysts noticed the information was always outdated by several days, as though someone deliberately withheld fresher details. This caught the attention of Section V's counter-espionage officers, who suspected deliberate misinformation or a hesitant informant playing a complex game. Adding to the confusion, U.S. intelligence officers stationed at the American legation in Lisbon had also taken notice. The United States had recently entered the war following Pearl Harbor, and the intelligence environment in Lisbon was rapidly shifting. The OSS had not yet fully established itself in the region, leaving the U.S. Embassy's Naval Attaché Office responsible for gathering maritime intelligence. Reports from Lieutenant William Harding described a peculiar pattern. The Ghost appeared to provide small but accurate maritime details, yet he refused larger payments, despite clearly living a transient life. Harding wrote in a confidential note, "He moves as if expecting to vanish at any moment. Payment seems irrelevant to him." Meanwhile, the WWII was also trying to tighten its grip. German officers in Lisbon were known to exploit refugees, offering food or forged documents in exchange for information. The Ghost's North African disappearance made British analysts wonder if he had fallen under German influence early in the war. But nothing confirmed this. British counterintelligence noticed something else entirely. He avoided direct contact with the SS or Gestapo representatives stationed in Spain. That avoidance suggested caution, or fear. The role of Lisbon itself cannot be overstated. The city was a choke point of wartime escape, a neutral ground where Britain, Germany, and the United States conducted an invisible war beneath the veneer of diplomatic civility. Hotel lobbies swarmed with journalists, aristocrats, and fugitives. Railway stations carried passengers whose luggage doubled as intelligence containers. And in this crowded arena of travel and secrecy, the ghost moved with an ease that defied categorization. By spring 1942, British intelligence had connected enough dots to suggest he might be working all sides to protect himself. The ghost often met German handlers in busy cafes where no one could be certain who listened. Hours later, he might appear near a British-controlled safe house, his coat noticeably altered. On one recorded occasion, he was seen exiting a pawn shop known to serve as a covert drop point for the US Navy. Such overlapping movements raised a disturbing possibility. He might be feeding curated information to all sides and allowing each to believe they alone held his loyalty. The ghost's reputation continued to grow. A Portuguese police inspector, accustomed to handling visa forgeries, commented to a British liaison officer, "He has 3 faces. You see whichever one he wants you to see." That phrase struck MI6 analysts as more than a metaphor. If he was deliberately crafting multiple identities, he had become something beyond a simple defector or informant. He was a man who understood the value of ambiguity. But the real shift occurred when the British learned he had been present near a restricted diplomatic pouch transfer between the US and British embassies, a transfer normally guarded by military police. He had no reason to be in that corridor. No diplomatic cover. No clearance. And yet he walked through without challenge, as though one of the guards recognized him. That was when MI6 analysts began to entertain a difficult possibility. The ghost might not have been a pawn at all. He may have learned how to navigate overlapping intelligence systems, British, American, and German, by exploiting their blind spots, their rivalries, and the chaos of a world at war. By the time summer approached, a single question dominated Allied discussions in Lisbon. Was K-12, the vanished signals specialist from North Africa, now a man who served 3 masters? And if so, why had none of those masters been able to claim him fully? The next answer would not come from archives or cafes, but from a dangerous trail of safe houses stretching toward the Atlantic coast, a path that hinted the ghost was preparing for something far larger than anyone realized. In early 1942, while the Axis tightened its grip across Europe, a new player officially entered the silent war unfolding in Lisbon, the United States. Though American attaches had been operating quietly since the late 1930s, the establishment of the Office of Strategic Services, still in its infancy, brought fresh eyes and sharper instincts to the intelligence battleground. And as these new American operatives settled into the crowded safe houses along Rua do Arsenal, one name began crossing their desks with increasing frequency. A courier MI6 called the Ghost, the Germans referred to as K-12, and Portuguese police regarded simply as a man they could never quite detain. To the OSS, fresh to the shadows of Europe, the Ghost was an anomaly. Unlike most informants who approached Allied officers in Lisbon, refugees, defectors, smugglers, this man demonstrated deliberate restraint. He offered no desperate bargains, no wild claims about German wonder weapons, no fabricated tales of imminent invasions. Instead, he delivered small, precise fragments of information. Rumors of U-boat supply operations near Vigo, sightings of Abuer officers on the Spanish border, or murmured schedules of merchant ships attempting dangerous Atlantic crossings. Lieutenant Arthur Caldwell, one of the first OSS officers to document him, wrote, "He carries himself like someone trained, not a wanderer. Someone who once followed orders. Now he follows only survival." American surveillance soon revealed something else. The Ghost traveled along routes known only to experienced clandestine couriers, slipping between Portuguese fishing villages and the labyrinthine alleys near the Alfama district. These paths were not random. They mirrored the escape lines used by smugglers helping Allied airmen flee occupied France. The OSS believed he might be involved, though no one could confirm whether he was aiding escape networks or merely using their infrastructure to hide. Still, the Americans persisted. Lisbon was a city where patience paid dividends. And so the OSS placed watchers across the city, hotel lobbies, train stations, post offices. But the ghost seemed to anticipate every move. The Americans would catch a glimpse of him leaving Rocio Station, only to lose him minutes later in a crowd of Polish refugees. They would spot him near the harbor, speaking to an Estonian sailor, only for him to vanish as soon as the ship's horn sounded. Caldwell later summarized the frustration. "He is not avoiding us. He is eluding everyone." Meanwhile, MI6 continued building its own case file. British analysts noticed the ghost's movements were not only evasive, they were patterned. He visited a particular café near the São Pedro da Alcântara overlook every 10 to 12 days. Within hours of each visit, the WWII's Lisbon station transmitted an uncharacteristically short cable to Berlin. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Yet when British surveillance increased, the ghost abruptly changed his route. Every observer, whether Allied or Axis, was forced to admit the same unsettling truth. He was aware he was being followed, and he adjusted accordingly. Tensions sharpened in July 1942, when OSS officers learned the ghost had been seen entering a known German safehouse near Estoril. American reaction was swift. A joint U.S. Portuguese surveillance team was organized, one of the first American-run intelligence operations in the region. But even with fresh manpower and carefully prepared observation posts, the mission failed spectacularly. The team watched the safe house's entrances throughout the night, expecting the ghost to emerge. He never did. The next morning, the OSS discovered something impossible. He had left through a back exit that had been sealed for months, its gate rusted shut. Portuguese inspectors swore no one could have passed through it recently. But the ghost was gone. The incident rattled American officers. They had underestimated him. Some believed he slipped out through a crawlspace linking to a neighboring yard. Others suspected he might have had inside help from someone in the German unit. The only certainty was that he escaped with a calm, almost practiced precision. This prompted a reassessment. The OSS began examining whether the ghost had received formal intelligence training. His North African background, vague, fragmented, unconfirmed, became more important than ever. If he had been a signals specialist, he might have understood not only radio procedures but also British and German surveillance patterns. He might have known when watchers changed shifts, or how certain agencies preferred to position their field officers. For a man surviving on 3 fronts, such knowledge would have been invaluable. One unresolved clue soon deepened the mystery. A young American code clerk, reviewing routine embassy logs, noted that each time the ghost passed near U.S. diplomatic facilities, someone tampered with the embassy's outgoing mailbag. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was added. The only trace was the faintest shift in the way the pouch straps were tied. It suggested he had been checking, not intercepting, American communications. But why? By late 1942, historians would later note, the OSS had begun calling the ghost something different, the courier of vanished loyalties. He seemed to drift between agencies with an intelligence instinct uncomfortably close to their own. And as winter approached, American and British analysts recognized something larger. The ghost was not simply surviving. He was maneuvering, preparing for something. An operation, a flight, perhaps even a betrayal. The clues pointed toward the Atlantic coast, where clandestine maritime routes carried information, fugitives, and occasionally spies across the ocean. Few realized then that the most important turning point in his story was about to unfold, not inside Lisbon's crowded cafés, but on the windswept cliffs leading toward the harbor, where Allied intercept units were about to stumble upon evidence that would redefine everything they believed about him. By early 1943, Lisbon's intelligence landscape had become increasingly perilous. The city, a neutral island amid a continent consumed by war, was crowded with refugees, spies, diplomats, and clandestine couriers, all operating under the constant gaze of WWII agents and local police. It was here, amid the narrow streets of the Alfama district and the bustling port at Cais do Soda, that British MI6 analysts, American OSS officers, and Portuguese authorities all turned their focus toward one elusive figure. The ghost, the man who seemed to serve 3 masters yet owed allegiance to none. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, triggered by the discovery of a coded message intercepted from a Lisbon-based WWII station. The communication, sent in late February 1943, referenced what German officers called Operation Torch preparations in Gibraltar. The message hinted at a leak that could compromise the Allied landings in North Africa, a mission that, at the time, had become one of the most critical operations of the war. MI6 immediately suspected that the Ghost had either gathered sensitive details or facilitated the transfer of intelligence across borders. The timing was critical. The Allies could not afford missteps, and yet, the identity and motivations of the courier remained entirely unknown. A coordinated Allied surveillance operation was launched, involving a small network of MI6 and OSS officers stationed along the key transit points of Lisbon. Surveillance posts were set up along Rua do Arsenal, the docks at Santa Apollonia, and the Estoril railway line. Observers were trained to track the Ghost's distinctive patterns, a tendency to appear near crowded cafes at dawn, to leave through back alleys near the harbour, and to carry no visible identification. Still, as elaborate as these preparations were, the Ghost eluded capture once more. One MI6 report dryly noted, "Subject absent from all observation posts despite proximity. Appears to be aware of surveillance measures." The Ghost's movement suggested sophisticated planning. Portuguese police logs, reviewed retrospectively, indicated he had acquired forged identification papers from multiple sources. Some were Portuguese, others bore the seals of British consular authorities. The presence of these papers suggested access to high-level forgeries and an intimate understanding of local bureaucracy. He also maintained a network of informants among the local population, cafe owners, dockworkers, and railway porters who were aware of safe routes and discreet pickup points. Through these channels, he could obtain real-time information and move without fear of immediate detection. A particularly dramatic episode occurred on the evening of March 12, 1943. The Ghost was reportedly spotted exiting a small safe house near the port with a forged British ID. Surveillance teams were in place, cameras trained on the alleyways. When officers attempted to approach, he vanished. Hours later, investigators found only a Portuguese identity card torn in half and a fragment of an American-coded radio cipher tucked behind a loose brick in a wall. No footprints, no direct witnesses, and no clear escape route. The implication was clear. The Ghost's disappearance was deliberate, precise, and methodical. This sequence of events forced both British and American intelligence to reassess the Ghost's role. Had he been attempting to sabotage German operations in North Africa? Or was he playing a more complex game, feeding each agency enough information to maintain his cover while protecting a personal agenda? Some historians have suggested he may have acted as a triple agent, though proof remained elusive. Every recovered document, observation report, and coded message only deepened the mystery. Lieutenant Harding, reflecting on the March 12 incident in his personal diary, wrote, "He is not merely avoiding capture, he is sculpting his own intelligence map. We are observers of a strategy we cannot yet comprehend." Amid this tense pursuit, Allied officers also noted the Ghost's apparent understanding of maritime routes. He frequented docks known to the OSS as entry points for transatlantic intelligence and refugee traffic. It was here, between the Tagus River and the Atlantic shipping lanes, that he could potentially facilitate the movement of sensitive material. His ability to appear at critical junctures, combined with the sophistication of his evasion, suggested more than luck. It implied deliberate operational planning and professional training. Yet even with this growing understanding, a major question remained unresolved. The Ghost seemed neither entirely loyal to the Allies nor to the Axis. Documents captured from German units occasionally suggested he provided intelligence, but the information often appeared outdated or intentionally misleading. Similarly, Allied intercepts indicated his movements could be tracked only in retrospect, never in real time. He operated in a gray zone, a shadow that traversed the thresholds of loyalty, legality, and survival. As March gave way to April 1943, the Ghost's trail led increasingly toward Lisbon's Atlantic coast. Observers believed he was preparing for a critical move, perhaps an escape, a delivery of high-value intelligence, or a test of agency reactions. The city's spies, who had spent months attempting to anticipate his actions, could only speculate. One MI6 operative commented, If he has a plan, it is one we may only understand when it is already complete. The stakes were high. Allied operations in North Africa were imminent, and any intelligence breach could prove catastrophic. Yet, despite elaborate coordination between MI6, OSS, and Portuguese authorities, the ghost remained unclaimed, unbroken, and unknowable. Lisbon, a city already steeped in wartime intrigue, had witnessed one of the most skilled and enigmatic operators of the era. And so, as the Allied watchposts along the port awaited the next move, one certainty remained: the ghost was not finished, and the path he chose would lead into even greater uncertainty, stretching from the shadowed streets of Lisbon toward operations that could influence the outcome of the war across the Mediterranean. By mid-1943, the ghost's activities had begun to intersect with some of the most consequential Allied intelligence breakthroughs in the Atlantic. While Lisbon remained a hub of wartime espionage, new evidence surfaced suggesting that his movements may have had direct impact on German naval operations. Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park, having recently intercepted WWII communications, noted references to a mysterious figure whose intelligence appeared to sabotage supply transfers critical to U-boat deployments. Analysts speculated that the ghost, the man known to both MI6 and the OSS, had begun manipulating the flow of information in ways that went far beyond mere survival. It began with the port of Vigo in northern Spain, a known staging point for German U-boats and supply vessels. In late May 1943, intercepted WWII cables indicated that a shipment of torpedo components and fuel had been delayed under unclear circumstances. The message noted only that Operative K-12 may be responsible. While the Germans feared exposure, Allied officers were cautiously optimistic. If the ghost had indeed interfered, intentionally or otherwise, it suggested a level of operational influence that few single agents could achieve. Lieutenant Caldwell of the OSS described the development in his field notes. He may have turned the tables entirely. We cannot verify intent, only outcome, but it is remarkable nonetheless. Historians reviewing these events note the delicate balance the ghost maintained. For every move that hindered German operations, he had to preserve the appearance of cooperation with the Axis. WWII officers occasionally recorded seeing him at minor checkpoints, paying meticulous attention to German protocols, but never betraying outright defiance. Simultaneously, British and American observers saw him entering safe houses, exchanging coded messages, and disappearing with the same calculated ease. The duality of his actions suggested an operative who had mastered the art of ambiguity, using deception as both shield and weapon. Yet the question of motive remained unresolved. Did the ghost act primarily to protect the Allies, or was he simply maintaining a balance between powers to ensure his own survival? In one MI6 dispatch, Colonel Lenton reflected, "He operates as though the entire city is a chessboard, with each power's pawns moving exactly as he expects. To misstep would mean death, yet he continues to play without error." Intelligence teams across Lisbon were forced to accept that some actions could not be understood in isolation. The ghost's intent could only be inferred through the results of his interventions. As summer progressed, American officers traced his path toward clandestine maritime routes. Safe houses in Estoril and along the Tagus River appeared repeatedly in his movements, often coinciding with the departures of small vessels carrying refugees and potentially sensitive documents. These routes were the lifelines for Allied intelligence, moving information from Iberia to North Africa and beyond. For the ghost to navigate them undetected, he had to anticipate surveillance, weather, and human error, a skill that elevated him above ordinary couriers and into the realm of professional espionage legend. Yet the ghost's network was not flawless. Occasionally, scraps of his work left traces that puzzled both Allied and Axis analysts. One intercepted cable, partially decoded by Bletchley Park, revealed a curious pattern. Misinformation had been subtly inserted into German reports, leading WWII officers to suspect each other of negligence. This tactic suggested deliberate manipulation, rather than chance, and reinforced the notion that the ghost might have been orchestrating events for his own strategic purposes. In other words, he was not merely moving between masters. He may have been redefining the rules of allegiance entirely. Despite these developments, Lisbon's intelligence community remained in the dark regarding his ultimate objectives. He was observed meeting with low-level operatives from multiple sides, yet no record exists of him conferring with high command. The impression that emerged among observers was that he operated independently, inserting himself at critical junctures while remaining invisible at decision-making levels. Even those who followed his trail most closely admitted that he left only fragments of a narrative, leaving others to assemble the story from the pieces. By September 1943, the Ghost had established himself as a figure of both admiration and frustration. Allied officers began to refer to him in whispers as the man who serves nobody but himself, yet aids all who benefit from his movements. His impact on German U-boat operations, Allied intelligence, and the clandestine maritime network was tangible, yet the full measure of his role remained elusive. He had become a living paradox, a triple operative whose allegiance, skill, and discretion defied conventional categorization. As the Allied campaigns in North Africa intensified, the Ghost's presence in Lisbon diminished, signaling the possibility of a major transition. Observers speculated that he might be preparing for an operation beyond the city's limits, perhaps across the Atlantic or into contested Mediterranean theaters. The question that haunted intelligence officers, who was he truly working for, and what was his ultimate objective, remained unanswered. Lisbon, a city already steeped in intrigue, had witnessed one of its most enigmatic operators at work. And as autumn approached, the Ghost disappeared once more into the alleys, safe houses, and maritime routes of neutral Portugal, leaving behind only fragments of his strategy and a trail of unanswered questions. One certainty persisted. Those who had encountered him would forever remember the skill, cunning, and ambiguity of a man who had altered the course of intelligence operations without ever being fully understood. By late 1943, Lisbon's wartime corridors of espionage had shifted in urgency and focus. The Allies had secured North Africa and were preparing for campaigns in Sicily and Italy, yet the Ghost, the mysterious operative known to MI6 as the Courier of Vanished Loyalties, had disappeared entirely from the city's network of safe houses, cafés, and docks. 4 months, neither British nor American intelligence could determine his whereabouts. He had left no trace, save for the fragmented coded messages, torn identity documents, and anecdotal reports from dockworkers and local informants. The question that haunted officers in both MI6 and OSS was simple, yet unanswerable. Where had he gone, and whose interests did he ultimately serve? The circumstances of his disappearance were remarkable in themselves. By October 1943, both British and American teams had coordinated a final surveillance sweep along the Tagus River and the surrounding Atlantic harbors. Portuguese inspectors assisted, noting every vessel and passenger entering or leaving Lisbon. The operation was meticulously planned. Observation posts on the Santa Apollonia docks, undercover officers in nearby cafés, and informants along the Estoril coastline. Yet the Ghost was nowhere to be found. No ship logs listed a passenger matching any of his known aliases. No informant reported seeing him. It was as if he had evaporated into the city's shadows, leaving behind only whispers and speculation. Historians examining these events suggest a variety of possibilities. One theory is that the Ghost successfully escaped via one of the clandestine maritime routes he had so often exploited, potentially reaching North Africa, Britain, or even neutral Spain undetected. Another posits that he may have been absorbed into another Allied or Axis operation, his skills and discretion so valuable that higher authorities chose to erase public traces of his existence. Yet no archival record confirms either outcome. Unlike most wartime operatives, his fate was never officially documented, his personal identity never verified. He had, in effect, become a ghost in both name and reality. The intelligence implications of his disappearance were profound. For the Allies, losing track of a man capable of influencing German naval logistics, aiding refugee networks, and manipulating intelligence flow left both tactical and strategic questions unresolved. MI6 officers in Lisbon noted that his absence created a void in their understanding of the city's espionage ecosystem. OSS analysts faced a similar dilemma. The disappearance left an incomplete picture of transatlantic communication vulnerabilities and the efficacy of Lisbon's maritime escape routes. The lessons of his operations, while partially recorded in fragmented files, remained tantalizingly out of reach. Yet beyond operational concerns, there was also a human dimension. Officers who had observed him in cafes, docks, and safe houses remembered a man of calm composure and deliberate action. Lieutenant Caldwell wrote in his field diary, "He seemed never hurried, never nervous. Every move was calculated, yet he carried the air of someone escaping something deeper than war itself. I cannot determine if he is friend or foe, only that he is extraordinary." This observation resonated with both British and American intelligence, encapsulating the paradox of an operative who served no master fully, yet whose actions tangibly influenced the course of events in Lisbon and beyond. The Ghost's legacy, in many ways, became as much about the questions he left behind as the intelligence he delivered. His brief interventions in German logistics, Allied maritime operations, and the complex network of refugee and courier routes underscored the fragility of wartime systems. His ability to vanish at critical moments demonstrated the limitations of even the most coordinated intelligence efforts. In essence, he had become an emblem of the uncertainty that pervaded World War II espionage, a reminder that not all players could be catalogued, predicted, or controlled. As 1943 drew to a close, Lisbon slowly returned to its rhythm of neutral vigilance, with spies, couriers, and diplomats continuing their clandestine operations amid the city's old streets and coastal avenues. Yet for those who had observed the Ghost, the memory of his presence lingered like a faint shadow. MI6 files describe the final report simply as unresolved, emphasizing the enduring mystery. Who was he, what did he truly achieve, and where did he ultimately go? Ultimately, the story of the Ghost serves as a testament to the complexity and ambiguity of intelligence work during World War II. Not all operatives fit neatly into categories of hero or traitor. Not all allegiances were clear, and not all outcomes could be anticipated. The Ghost, known to some as K-12, to others as an anonymous courier, vanished from history not with a bang, but with the quiet precision of a man who had mastered both survival and secrecy. His disappearance remains one of Lisbon's enduring wartime enigmas, a ghost with three masters, leaving behind a legacy defined by skill, mystery, and the haunting uncertainty of his true loyalties.